love that imagery because I just returned from China and it's just so robust and exciting. I want to welcome you to Global Opportunities and Deepening China's Reform in the New Era. It's a big title, but we're going to break it down so it's very understandable for you. This event is brought to you by China Media Group and the Bank of China USA. I'm Mike Walter, joining you from the Bank of China USA here in New York City. It's a fascinating time to be talking about what's happening in China because the Third Plenum just ended. They've basically come up with a roadmap for the future with a number of reforms, more than 300 reforms. We won't go over every one of them, but we're going to hit some of the key ones here today. I see our panelists smiling about that. They're happy they don't have to know all of them. So we're going to be talking about China's modernization, which of course is key. Reform, also key. In order to understand the present and the future, I think it's important to also take a step back in time and talk a little bit about China's past. And of course, we know that there was a Third Plenum in 1978, which basically was this roadmap which saw this amazing transformation in this country. We saw more than 800 million people pulled out of extreme poverty. Some are calling it a modern miracle. I spoke to Jeffrey Sachs, the renowned economist, and he, of course, has witnessed this. He's been going to China for more than 40 years and kind of traces that evolution. But before we get to that, I'd like to introduce the ambassador to the United States from China, Ambassador Xie Feng.
Ladies and gentlemen, dear friends, it is my great pleasure to join you at this Global Dialogue series. The third plenary session of the 20th Central Committee of the Communist Party of China was held recently. The session was a full success and attracted global attention. This dialogue series is a good opportunity for us to exchange views on this important meeting and the global opportunities from China's deepening reforms. The pivotal session was held at a critical time as the country is striving for national rejuvenation through Chinese modernization. The most important outcome of the meeting was the adoption of its resolution, a blueprint of further deepening reform comprehensively to advance Chinese modernization. The session speaks to the strong determination of the Central Committee with President Xi Jinping at its core to deepen reform. The meeting is a step forward in China's consistent reform efforts and its pursuit of Chinese modernization. Specifically, the meeting has sent out three important signals. First, the efforts to further deepen reform will be more systematic and integrated. Every third plenary session during the past decades has taken reform and opening up to a new height. The Central Committee set up the Commission on Comprehensively Deepening Reform 10 years ago, with President Xi Jinping taking the lead and chairing 72 meetings of the Commission. Over 2,000 programs have been introduced to strengthen, broaden, and deepen reform. As of this plenary session, systematic reform plans have been made, involving over 300 concrete steps. The main lines of the effort include a high-standard socialist market economy, better quality of life, and building a beautiful China. The steps will deepen reform more comprehensively and take it to the next level. Second, the system of socialism with Chinese characteristics will be further refined. The overarching goal of comprehensively deepening reform is to build up the system of socialism with Chinese characteristics and modernize the system and capacity for governance. To that end, we will focus on institutional building, beginning with economic institutions to enhance macroeconomic governance, support innovation on all fronts, and promote high-level opening up. Meanwhile, we will deepen reforms in culture, ecological protection, national defense, and the military. All this will further harmonize production relations and production forces, the superstructure and the economic base, the national governance, and social development. The session has outlined a well-designed reform roadmap and timetable. The proposed reforms will be done by 2029, leading up to a high-level socialist market economic system by 2035. By then, the system of socialism with Chinese characteristics will be more refined. The modernization of the governance system and the capacity will be realized. With upgraded systems, China will deliver upgraded national governance. Third, Chinese modernization will embrace broader prospects. The central task of the CPC in the new era is to achieve Chinese modernization. It is the broadest based consensus of the Chinese people and a theme of the reform measures set forth at this plenary session. To that end, a high-level socialist market economy will provide a crucial foundation. Education, science, technology, and talent will be the strategic underpinnings. Chinese modernization means more integrated urban-rural development, better livelihoods, and fewer institutional hurdles to further unlocking social productivity and stimulating social vitality. All these will bring robust momentum and institutional underpinnings to Chinese modernization. Throughout history, humanity has reached many crossroads between unity or division, openness or isolation, cooperation or confrontation. Our world is changing fast. Geopolitical conflicts spill over. Economic globalization meets headwinds. But China remains steadfast. We want unity, openness, and cooperation. History tells us that openness leads to progress, while isolation brings stagnation. Building small yard, high fence won't hinder the development of others. Decoupling only blocks one's own path. Major country confrontation and conflict could be a catastrophe for us all. China firmly pursues an independent foreign policy for peace. We are committed, as always, to opening up high-quality Belt and Road cooperation and delivering on our 3 global initiatives for security, development, and civilization. The world is a community with shared future for mankind, and open China will contribute the much-needed stability and certainty to a turbulent world. Ladies and gentlemen, friends, reform and opening up has been a forward journey of China and the world. The 3rd plenary session has sounded the clarion call for deepening reform. It is a new landmark in Chinese modernization. It opens up a new chapter for China and the world to developing together. Ladies and gentlemen, friends, China is heading toward greater development through reform and opening up. That will bring to the world more confidence and opportunities. We want to become a better self and make this world a better place. Blaming others or seeking confrontation won't solve one's own problems or the global challenges. The experiences of China-US relationship in the past few years tells us that dialogue, cooperation, and stability are better than confrontation, decoupling, and volatility. With the bilateral relationship coming to a crucial stage of restabilization, we must cherish what has been achieved and meet challenges ahead. For the good of our 2 nations and beyond, China and the US need to help each other succeed and prosper together. Let us promote this relationship under the principles of mutual respect, peaceful coexistence, and win-win cooperation. A sound, stable, and sustainable China-US relationship will contribute to a brighter future of both countries and the world. Thank you.
The last time I saw this gentleman was in Beijing. It was the 2 sessions. They were going to have a news conference with Foreign Minister Wang Yi, and you have all these journalists from around the world crammed into this small room. And Robert Lawrence Coon was on with me providing analysis, and I was hanging on his every word, and I'm sure you will be as well. He's written extensively about the achievements in China under the leadership of President Xi Jinping. He's also written numerous books, and one of them seems very germane to what we're talking about today. The title, How China's Leaders Think, The Inside Story of China's Reform and What This Means for the Future. I think that's the perfect topic, right? He is also the recipient of the prestigious China Reform Friendship Medal, and he is the chair of the Coon Foundation. Robert Lawrence Coon. Great to see you.
Good morning, friends. 各位来宾朋友们，你们好. If you're an international company you have 3 questions about the Third Plenum. Number 1, what are the reforms? Number 2, do I have confidence in the reforms? And number 3, how will they affect my company or my economic participation? So let's go through each of the 3 questions. I have 3 minutes, so it'll be fairly short. As far as what are the reforms, we have the 300 different specific reforms that have just been announced the last day or so. We have the overall communique. But I ask you to look at the big vision. The big vision in China is the future. And the future, as set by President Xi Jinping, are now 3 dates. 2049, the 100th anniversary of the People's Republic of China, when China seeks to have the great rejuvenation of the Chinese nation, which was defined really within weeks of President Xi's ascension to leadership as the Chinese dream. And that is determined by 6 aspirational adjectives: prosperous, strong, democratic, culturally advanced, harmonious, and beautiful. So those are all situations which China does not have full today, but that's the goal by 2049. Then 2035 to basically achieve socialist full modernization. And then the new date, which I'll talk a little bit more in a second, 2029, when the reforms need to be achieved. So the big vision is the future. And so, therefore, China will not mortgage the future in order to satisfy short-term concerns, whether it's investors or domestic economy. That's a big message. Now, there will be short-term measures that are targeted to have benefits, the rate cuts we saw in the last day. Many of those, and we'll see those in the 300 points. But the overall message is long-term is more important than short-term. That's what the leadership in China has determined. So it's high-quality development, new quality productive forces, indigenous innovation. All of these activities build for the long term. When you invest in science and technology, it's a 10-year investment. It's not a short-term stimulus. Again, there will be targeted short-term things, but the big vision is long-term. That's what the reforms are. Number 2, can I have confidence in the reform? Obviously, much of the international media has been concerned, and international analysts, about the consistency of reform. There have been policy changes that people have seen. So can you have confidence in the reforms? Will there be new changes that were unexpected? These are legitimate questions that international companies have, because predictability and certainty, as we just heard, is critical. That's more important than anything else, is to have a confidence in the continuity. And so I point to you one specific demonstration of my confidence that the reforms that have been formulated will be implemented in terms of their best efforts. And that is the introduction of this new date, 2029. That's the first time we've heard it. In the past, we had 2049. The 100th anniversary was a big long-term goal. This has been for many years. And then at the 19th Party Congress, we heard the intermediary date of 2035, when basic full modernization will be achieved. And those are 2 major goals. And now we have a new date, 2029, 5 years, and for the achievement of the reforms set forth. Why this is important? It's not just an arbitrary date. It sets the criteria by which officials and executives in China will be judged in their own career paths. That being the case, I have confidence they will make every effort to achieve that result. That doesn't mean it'll be perfect, and it does mean that that goals will be modulated. That's the Chinese way, and constantly adjusted over time. Third question. How will it affect my company? That's an individual analysis. I'm not here to tell you that every company will do great in China. That's not the case. I wouldn't do that. 30 years ago, I might have said that. If you had a product and you needed to make it cheaply and you have great labor at very low cost, you bring some capital and know-how, you could probably do well. Can't say that today. China's a very advanced market. You're competing with Chinese companies. How do you do that? You'll certainly have an even playing field, as you've heard now. That's real. But will it affect your company? It's an individual decision. I will tell you this, that for certain companies whose know-how, whose technology, whose capacity fit within the strategic vision of China, which is what you've heard, they will have a better opportunity now than ever before. But whether that applies to your company is an individual decision. I love keeping watch. It's a pleasure to be here with everyone, and I look forward to the rest of the session. 谢谢你, thank you.
Robert, as always, thanks so much. Great insights. Our next speaker is Stephen Kennedy Smith. He is the chairman of New Frontier Bio. He's also a board member of the John F. Kennedy Library Foundation. Please welcome Stephen to the stage.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Good morning. I'd like to thank the Bank of China and CCTV for inviting me here today. I'm coming here as an American, obviously, but first of all, as a human. And our family deeply believes in person-to-person and human-to-human contact above everything else. I have to say that sitting here listening to the plans of the Chinese government for 2035 and 2049 is very, very interesting, because here in the United States in the Democratic Party, we just try to figure out what's happening next weekend. I want to speak a little bit personally. If you could show the next slide. So our family has a deep and very rewarding relationship with China and Chinese Americans. Yo-Yo Ma actually played for President Kennedy when he was 7 years old, and he's still a very close and a longtime friend of our family. Similarly, IMK was chosen by my Aunt Jacqueline Kennedy and my father to build the Kennedy Library, the memorial to President Kennedy. And my uncle, Senator Kennedy, traveled to China in 1977, and he first proposed normalization of relations with China in 1966. And my parents were on that trip with him, and my father came back and said they had drunk a lot of the fuel that fired the revolution. And he said, I understand why that revolution was successful, because that's some very strong fuel. And then the other thing is I published a book on President Kennedy's speeches, and we did translate that book into Chinese, and we're looking forward to hopefully having it distributed in mainland China. The thing that I'm reminded of, I'm a student of history. I worked on the Foreign Relations Committee, and one of the critical moments in the Kennedy presidency was the Cuban Missile Crisis in October of 1962, when relationship with the Soviet Union was at its low point. And my father was in the Situation Room for that crisis, and both he and President Kennedy and everyone who was there were deeply affected by that. And it led to President Kennedy initiating negotiations with the Soviet Union, which ultimately led to the Nuclear Test Ban Treaty and the Helsinki Accords, which have protected us against nuclear war for the last 60 years. And shortly before he died, he gave a speech at American University, which is considered one of his greatest speeches, where he said, in the final analysis, we all inhabit this small planet, we all breathe the same air, we all cherish our children's future, and we are all mortal. And so when I look at where we are today with China, I think we have reason for hope, actually, because during the first 2 years of the Biden administration, there was a really, I think, dangerous amount of mistrust and miscommunication that took place that could have destabilized the global economy and led to war. And it was through the efforts of Secretary Yellen and Raimondo and Blinken, as well as President Xi and Foreign Minister Wang Yi, who emphasized that cooperation was imperative and who took initiatives in cooperation with the U.S. government, including trying to limit the importation of fentanyl into the United States, that really set a new tone for the relationship. So I think that it's a credit to both countries that they had smart, pragmatic leadership, and I hope that that will continue. The Pew Foundation recently did a study that showed that in 24 out of 22 countries, the U.S. had a more favorable impression than China because of whatever, but it shows that, you know, the wolf warrior diplomacy approach doesn't work. On the U.S. side, the tariffs did not work. The Kennedy School did a study that showed that tariffs created no new jobs in the United States and cost the American taxpayers $23 billion. So I think that, you know, both sides learned and have set a new tone for the relationship, and I hope we can continue with that cooperation. The thing that I'm concerned about is a Cold War-style political strategy of isolation, containment, and aggression towards China advocated by Matt Pottinger and some of the other Trump advisors. And I think that if that avenue is pursued, it's important for people to know that there will be people in the United States who oppose that, and that there are many people of political goodwill on both sides who do not want aggressive policies on either side. After World War II, the generation that President Kennedy was part of, and I had 7 uncles who served in the armed forces, and some of them fought in World War II, and some were killed. They created the international order, the UN, the IMF, the World Bank, the ITA, the International Court of Justice, and other institutions that preserved world peace for 60 years without a major war, right up until the war in Ukraine. And that, if China and America commit themselves to maintaining international institutions and not violating international law, then we can have another 60 years, because we will determine what happens in the rest of the world. I hope that the words of President Kennedy and the words of Lao Tzu, the profound wisdom of ancient China, together with us who love peace in the United States and those of you who love peace in China, can work together to find a way to peacefully coexist. So, of course, the pursuit of peace is not easy. Pursuing peace requires vision, wisdom, and courage. But we choose to pursue peace not because it is easy, but because it is hard. My dear Chinese friends, let us take action. May peace forever be with us.
Up next, we're going to have comments from Hu Wei. He's the President and Chief Executive Officer of the Bank of China USA. He's going to provide his thoughts on China's deepening reform.
As both the CEO of Bank of China USA and the Chairman of the China General Chamber of Commerce, I'm privileged to witness and contribute to the profound transformation unfolding within China and the ripple effects across the globe. China's journey of reform and opening up has been nothing short of remarkable. It is a journey defined by bold innovation and unwavering commitment, a journey that has catalyzed unparalleled economic growth and woven China more deeply into the global economic fabric, a journey that has not only reshaped China's economic landscape, but also offered valuable lessons and opportunities to the world. China's pledge to deepening reforms and expand openness is unequivocal. In this ever-evolving landscape of technological revolutions and industrial transformations, China remains steadfast in its commitment to the global community. I strongly believe that China's role in global economy and the critical relationship China and the U.S. have forged over the last 45 years will continue to provide opportunities for U.S.-China business cooperation. As chairman of the China General Chamber of Commerce, I have seen firsthand the power of collaboration. Our members, spanning various industries, contribute to a shared mission of promoting sustainable business practices and cultural exchange. In the spirit of new opportunities presented by China's ongoing reforms, we continue to advocate for a business environment that is open, fair, and beneficial for all. We believe in building bridges, not walls, in the global marketplace. At Bank of China, we are also deeply engaged in this journey, facilitating global trade and investment that connected diverse markets and fostering economic exchange and mutual growth, leveraging on our tens of thousands of branches within mainland China and operations covering 64 countries and regions. Our commitment is not just to advocate our own goals, but to enable and support a high-quality development that benefits all. So let us use platforms like today's dialogue to deepen our understanding, exchange ideas, and collaboration on future initiatives. Together, we can navigate the complexities of this new era and turn challenges into opportunities. Let us draw on our collective wisdom and strength to continue to a modernized global economy that promises peace, prosperity, and sustainable development for all. I'm looking forward to working with all of you to engage in meaningful dialogues, share insights, and forge new partnerships that will help shape the future U.S.-China economic relations and friendships. Thank you, and wish this dialogue great success in all of its endeavors. Thank you.
Let me introduce our panelists. I'm delighted to have them here with us today. Anthony Moretti is the department head and associate professor of communication and organizational leadership at Robert Morris University in Pennsylvania. About 7-8 hours away from here if you're driving.
A lot quicker if you fly.
It's quicker if you fly, which he did. I was smart, and the flight actually worked this weekend, which is remarkable.
I need one going home. Keep your fingers crossed.
Yes, exactly. William Jones is sitting in the middle. He is the former Washington bureau chief of the publication Executive Intelligence Review. And Anthony Chan is a familiar face for those of you who watch CGTN. We have him on all the time, talking to him about economics and Wall Street and what's happening. So he's a former chief economist for JP. Anthony, why don't I start with you? You know, this is a blueprint. I said I wasn't going to force you to recite all more than 300 reforms, but clearly, as Robert was spelling out, it's not just reforms, it's dates and targets, which is important. Kind of give me your takeaway from the communique.
Well, Mike, I'm really impressed with the communique and certainly the goals, because what I see is a real change. In the past, China was more focused on making sure that they hit the growth targets, like a 5% growth target a year. But now, in this communique, what you see is that now the focus is much greater on quality growth and innovation, rather than trying to, I don't want to use the word imitate, but somehow produce a new product that using lower costs. Now they're not saying, I'm going to make the product that's in the United States better, but rather I'm going to create a new product. And I think this is new and very innovative and very exciting, because it puts China in a completely different position that is going to really be prepared for the future. So the new communique gives me hope that we will see China taking growth and quality of growth to the next level.
And William, we're going to talk a lot about business here, but I think it's important for people to recognize that these reforms are not just business related. They are about finance, but also education, property, legislative affairs. What were your takeaways?
Well, the thing that I thought was remarkable is that the Chinese growth since reform and opening up has always been centered around science and technology. Science and technology, not simply as something that comes into economic growth, but as becomes the driver of economic growth. What we see at the Third Plenum is that policy is on steroids. Where China is moving today is not only to expand science and technology, but I interpret it as expanding the rate of new scientific discoveries. There was a very strong discussion about the notion of creativity, both in terms of the education department and the science department. What China wants to do, especially now where they're getting a lot of bad vibes from the U.S. on the sanctions and things like that they're going to insist on moving forward. They're open up to cooperation. They want cooperation with the United States, but it's the United States that has to make the decision on that. But regardless of that, they are going to move forward, and they see that because science and technology has put them in the role that they are now, going from a very relatively impoverished country to the most important economic producer in the world, they're now taking another step. And I think they're moving in a direction of creating a more rapid rate of technological discoveries as the basis of economic development. I would think, for instance, in areas like thermonuclear fusion power, China may be the first ones to put online a thermonuclear fusion power reactor and produce electricity for people. Other people have said that as well. But that's their orientation, and they have now the supply chain in these regions which will allow them to do that. And I think this is probably, for people who are interested in business and in high technology, that's where the action is now over the next decade and more.
And Anthony, just kind of piggybacking off what William said, I just, as I said, spent some time this summer in China, and of course with the COVID and the pandemic, it kind of limited our access. So it had been a few years since I'd been there, and it just seemed like the technological advances to me just seemed like they're on steroids. And we've talked a lot about tariffs here, and I want to get your thoughts on this. I kind of was looking at China and thinking, obviously they're not happy about the tariffs, but it was almost like heart bypass surgery. The arteries clogged. We got to figure out some other ways around. And it seems like in many ways, China's figured out a way, other models, doing business with others, and it's figured their way through this, whereas it seems like the United States still stymied, kind of stuck in this position, doesn't know exactly what to do. What are your thoughts?
And I feel the same way. I'll use the metaphor of being on an airplane. You get there and it's supposed to go in that nice straight line. Well, sometimes there's a storm over here, you have to adjust and whatnot. China appears to have that flexibility to say, all right, this path may need a little shift this way or a little shift this way, versus simply saying, this is the way we're going to do it. You're going to like it or you're not going to like it, but that's simply the way it's going to happen. It doesn't work in the 21st century. And I think one way that we see this, I think one thing that came out of the communique and also from the plenum, from my perspective, was this commitment to ensure that the lives of the Chinese people prosper, that they are made better, whether it's better educated, whether it's a better job, whether it's a better lifestyle, whatever the case might be. There's a commitment, in other words, to see the development of the country versus too often what we see in the United States, this simple approach that says, I have the hammer and I'm going to use it. That might have worked in the 20th century. It's not going to work in the 21st.
And Anthony, when you're in the business seat right now and you're looking at China, what do you see out of this communique? What are thoughts in terms of going in or continuing your presence there? What are people thinking about right now?
Well, Mike, I think you're right. What I see now in China, and I was there a couple of years ago, is much different. My father was born and raised in Guangzhou, and of course the world has changed dramatically. Today, what we see is smart manufacturing. What we see is not low manufacturing, but everything is, as you mentioned before, on steroids. Now it's all of a sudden, we want to make a product in China that maybe wasn't made before. You see that in the new energy vehicles, where they are basically now leading the world with these low-cost new energy vehicles that can actually compete because, in some sense, they're much better than their competition. So it's much, much different. And with regard to producing to grow the economy, it's also much different. If you look a couple of decades ago, you saw that exports in China as a percentage of GDP was much higher. That number has sharply collapsed because now they're moving more internally to make sure that consumers' spending eventually will be as important as it is in the United States, and that will be another engine of growth. But so we're seeing it in manufacturing of vehicles, but we're also seeing it in the new green energy space. We're seeing all the progress that China has made with regard to solar panels that is completely unparalleled with anything that anybody else is doing around the world. But we're also seeing that this sort of momentum and trend is also carrying into many other areas in science and technology. And that is the wave of the future, where China is no longer trying to just make the product better, but make a new product that will actually satisfy the needs of the rest of the world and really make a difference.
Anthony, it's interesting, you talk about growth. You see the growth of the reforms, as they were introduced in 1978, they're going in this way, and you're seeing the trajectory of extreme poverty going that way, which has been remarkable to watch. I mentioned that I had spoken to renowned economist Jeffrey Sachs about this, and he's been going to China more than 4 decades. I want to play a little bit of what he had to say in our conversation, and then I want to get your reaction on the other side. So let's watch.
China spent 40 years in fighting poverty. Deng Xiaoping reoriented China's economic strategy starting back in 1978. 1980, really, China got underway in its new market orientation, its opening to the world economy. 40 years later, they declared the victory over poverty in 2020. I happened to watch that close up my whole career because I first went to China now 43 years ago in 1981. I then went back all the time each year, sometimes several visits. So I watched China change with my own eyes from 1981 to 2020. I saw the end of poverty with my own eyes. When I first went in 1981, China was a very, very poor country. At times, the government asked me to help, give some suggestions. Around the year 2000, they asked me to tour the Western China provinces to have a look what could be done to accelerate the economic development and the reduction of poverty in those places. It was a real privilege. I went to a lot of places I otherwise probably wouldn't have seen. But I saw the change with my own eyes, and it was a long-term effort, sustained, thoughtful, and successful.
Successful indeed. It's grown to what the World Bank now calls an upper middle income country. Talk to me about this transformation that we've witnessed in China.
You know, I read something, give or take a month ago, that mentioned that all this talk about the EV success in China now is actually predicated on decisions that were made 10 and 12 years ago. To say, look, we're going to build and remember, nobody realistically was talking about electric vehicles about a decade ago. China's position was, okay, let's not look for, do we get an immediate return on dividends and growth and all of this immediately? Let's look 10, 12, 15, 20 years down the line. These will make, these cars will be less expensive. They will be much better for the climate, et cetera. You put all those things together, and what you see is a commitment to people, both in terms of whether you are at the highest rung of society or at the lowest rung of society. And you're right, as reforms in China went up, especially a commitment to alleviating poverty, we notice poverty going down. And this idea that anything in the U.S. could be fixed in 3 years seems silly, but that is too often the way that things are looked at. If the success is not immediate, it's junked. That's not a policy. That's like playing hopscotch.
Anthony, I know you love the numbers. I've got some here. Bilateral trade between the United States and China in 2022 was $690 billion. But in 2023, that, of course, just last year, it dropped to $575 billion. And we keep hearing the U.S. talking about this word decoupling. Where do you see things right now, and what needs to happen to kind of change things?
Well, Mike, as an economist, we know that decoupling is actually destabilizing and very hurtful to the economy, because we know we need comparative advantage. And so when you decouple, it's another way of saying that we move to a less efficient way of production. And less efficient means lower productivity, lower standard of living, all negative stuff. And we're also talking about tariffs today, which most economists, if they're really sincere in everything that they learn going to graduate school, and these are courses that I took during my my graduate studies in preparation to complete my PhD, tariffs are terrible. All you have to do is go back to the 1930s when I was just a little kid. You know, if you believe me, then that's pretty bad. But in the 1930s, smooth Ollie. What did we see there? We saw that tariffs were basically doubled. We saw an average tariff rate of about 45%. We saw some 20,000 products that were actually put tariffs on them. And it still was a very small percentage of the overall economy. And now we're talking about putting it on all the products. What happened in the 1930s? I don't have to remind all of you that we got a depression, and it was a much lower tariff rate. The tariff rate in some products went as high as 59%, the average was 45%, but now we're talking about maybe imposing tariffs that are 60%, maybe even imposing tariffs to replace the federal income tax. If you do that, We collected in federal income taxes last year $2.18 trillion. In order to raise that and still maintain the same level of high deficits that we have today, we would have to raise the tariff rate to a very high level. How high? Well, first of all, we also know that behavior changes when you have tariffs, which means that if you impose all those tariffs, you're going to import a lot less. And you're also going to see some substitution. So the tariff rate may have to go as high as 67%. And it's not on just some products. It'll be on all the products. And we'll not only just do it to China, but we'll do it to the rest of the world. And we now have a controlled experiment that shows, beyond a reasonable doubt, that if you have tariffs, you have slower economic growth, you have greater inefficiency, and you have the example of the Great Depression in the 1930s. So, ladies and gentlemen, let's move away from that kind of thinking, because it's not only destructive for the United States, but it's destructive for the rest of the world. We saw that with smooth hauling. It wasn't just the United States going into a depression. The rest of the world were also experiencing the negative fallout. So it is a step in the wrong direction, and I hope that we can actually listen to many of the speakers we had today, have cooperation, have innovation, have people sitting down with each other and exchanging dialogue and realizing that making such a serious mistake is something that we should never do.
And William, this leads to the next part of our conversation, because I think Anthony just teed this up beautifully for us. I talked to Yukon Wong, who's an economist who, of course, was the World Bank's country director in China from 1997 to 2004, about the current situation. And he just described this kind of this spiral that we're watching. Let's listen to what he had to say, and then I want to get your thoughts on the other side.
That difference in political economic systems in terms of tensions didn't matter when China was a poor country. People weren't concerned about that. The fact that your system is different, so what? I don't see you as a threat economically, politically, technologically, but a more powerful China, a richer China, economically stronger China, combined with a different political economic system, you have an issue, you have a problem. And today I see that kind of a problem between U.S. and China. We have some concept in economics, in game theory, called the prisoner's dilemma. You have two protagonists. They're both powerful. They both believe very strongly in their own objectives and aspirations. You have what I call tit-for-tat policies. You do something, I retaliate. You do something, I retaliate. And they both continue this process. The consequence is both sides are worse off.
So, William, the prisoner's dilemma, somebody obviously has the keys to the jail cell and can open them up. We certainly didn't see it under the Trump administration or the Biden administration. What's the solution there?
Well, obviously, the United States has got to understand that we're living in a different world than we were living in 10 years ago. China, other players, even Russia, are countries that have to be dealt with as major powers, as major players on the world scene. That was never the case before. They were always like the little brothers that one had to take care of or whatever. That's different now. And not only have they grown in power, the policy that's being pursued, particularly by China, and this notion of a community of shared inference or a community of common destiny, I actually like that term a little better, has won support throughout the world. The fact that China has developed has now led, and the BRI has led to the fact that countries in like South Africa and other countries in Latin America are moving in the direction of trying to create in one sense, a new world order based on the notion of the commonality of interest, on the common tasks of mankind. And the United States, neither political party and most of the political elites have not understood that change and the significance of that for U.S. policy. That will take some time. There's no magic bullet. But I think that the American people would be very happy to go back to the days of the Kennedy era. I think there is no enmity within the American people against China or any other nation. And you can see that, I'm sure, when you go walk the streets of the U.S., people coming from China can notice this. that there is this era of friendliness and cooperation. That must begin to be reflected in the political elites in some way. How we do that is hard to say. I know the people-to-people exchanges are absolutely important. But I think it also takes a certain amount of time. Somebody said, America will always do the right thing when they've tried everything else. They have tried everything else at this point. And I think at some point they will do the right thing.
I'm going to steal a line from Stephen. I jotted it down. Hopefully I can read my chicken scratch. But he said, we need to work together for the common good or history will not remember us well. I thought it was a really cogent point. And Anthony, to that point, you know, one of the things Yukon said is that when you get in this prisoner's dilemma and both are kind of locked in, it's helpful to maybe have a third party come in and try and talk to both sides. And he said in this case, you would think Europe, but France just went through their, you know, England just went through theirs. It just seems like all these countries are also going through their kind of upheavals, political developments and stuff. Do you see anybody out there on the horizon who can kind of step in and say, listen, you know, the two of you've got to work together. It's really important, not just for you, but for the world.
Well, you know, we talked about the global south both before we came onto the panel and before and since then. And I wonder if maybe it's going to come from there. And the message might be something as simple as this. Look, the U.S., you did it this way in the 20th century. These are the strings you attach to various policies. These are the things you, or the requirements you gave to countries in order to receive aid. That century's gone. That plan is gone. There is, whether you like it or not, a multipolar world out there. And the quicker you accept it, the quicker you adapt to it, the quicker you ensure that you see China more as friend than foe, and you see the global south less as the place where resources can be taken, and maybe there'll be a war fought here or there in places that Americans can't find on the map, but that's another story. And ultimately where you're going to see the world not as the U.S. and then everybody else, and not the U.S. versus everybody else, but the U.S. alongside, whether it's China and Europe, China, Europe, and Japan, however many countries you want to tack onto that list. It's incumbent, and again, you're right, somebody has to deliver that message. Perhaps it comes out of the global south.
And Anthony Chan, talking about the global south, one of the things that we've seen and witnessed in recent years, China's Belt and Road Initiative. And I also talked to Jeffrey Sachs about that. And I want to share his comments, and then I want to talk to you a little bit more about the BRI.
China provides a kind of role model for other parts of the world. I spend a lot of time in Africa, and I speak to African leaders all the time. And I tell them 40 years in China, 1980 to 2020, that can be Africa's future, should be Africa's future. Africa looks to the date 2063 because that's the 100th anniversary of African unity. So they look at a 40-year period from now to 2063. And I believe that that 40-year period, if pursued in a strategy like China's, is going to give Africa the same kind of success. So the example is there. And then the literal connectivity. I was recently in Ethiopia. And I saw a lot of economic development and agricultural improvement. Why? Well, the power lines came from a Chinese-built hydroelectric facility, and the rail that was taking out this agricultural production to the port in Djibouti and then across the Red Sea to the Middle East, which was the market, both were Chinese-built, Chinese investments under the Belt and Road concept. So this is why there's also a literal connectivity in how China's success spurs other countries.
Talk to us about what this has done for the global economy.
I recently wrote an update to the Belt and Roads Initiative for a think tank in China, and one of the things that impressed me the most, and I talked about extensively, is that when you look around the world, many of these developing countries, Africa, for example, that has a vast population, and we know we have a shortage of labor, so there's a lot of people in Africa that can actually help us with the shortage of labor, that one of the problems that whether it's Africa or another developing country often have is that they may have resources, they may have human capital, but they have no infrastructure in order to be able to sort of unleash all that growth potential. And Africa today is one of the youngest areas in terms of the population, the workers. That is the wave of the future. And so for China to actually go in there and unleash that growth potential by creating that infrastructure that they can not only produce, but they can actually become productive and be connected to the rest of the world is a gift. And that is something that I think most people are not appreciating as much. Now, we can complain about whether the Belt and Road Initiative is fair or not fair, but the reality is that 20 or 30 years from now, that Belt and Road Initiative is going to unleash a lot of the growth potential in many of these countries. And that is something that China has been behind for years. It's been a long-term process, and it hasn't been a straight line. There have been some bumps along the way. But I'm very excited about the Belt and Road Initiative because insofar as it's gone into areas that did not even have the possibility of a growth potential any time in the next 5 or 6 or 7 years, and now that is being made possible by the infrastructure and by all the other things that China has allowed and financed. It's a great opportunity for many of these countries. And guess what? The rest of the world is going to benefit from it. It's not just going to be Africa benefiting. It's going to be the United States. It's going to be Europe. It's going to be Latin America. This, to me, is one of the most exciting things that I think everybody should be talking about and excited about for the next decade or so.
William, I mentioned I was in China in May and June. I was working on a documentary series, Race to the Future, which will air on our network September 15th. Shameless plug. I got it in. But one of the interviews I did was with an executive with Volkswagen and Onway, and just talking about the partnership between a province, a city, and Volkswagen, and just how important it is. Let's listen to what he had to say, and I want to talk to you a little bit about this.
What made Hefei attractive to Volkswagen or Onway specifically?
I think in China there's a very interesting saying which is called 天时地利人和. Be at the right time, at the right place with the right people. It's partially, I would say, a coincidence, and partially it's really strong commitment from the people, because basically, and I was here also in 2018, and that there will be a transformation towards electric cars, but this transformation is coming much faster compared to what we expected it to be. And we expect at the moment that in 2025 we see already 50% of cars electrified in China, which is, given the market size, incredibly big. So we are definitely, with our products, which focus purely on electric, we are definitely here at the right place, at the right time. Also here, the Hefei government is part of this partnership, meaning basically that they are, for us, like entrepreneurs, same spirit. They wanna, as we wanna grow our company, they wanna grow their city, and that is somehow and turn their city from a formerly tier 3, tier 2 into a tier 1 city going forward. And then also when it comes to people, we have a very good talent pool, because he is 3 of the most important universities in China, like the USDC, the University of Science and Technology. And also there we have established good cooperations. So therefore this 天时地利人和, be at the right place at the right time with the right people, is definitely true for Hefei.
William, your thoughts, and is there a lesson there for American business?
Well, it's interesting, the right place at the right time. He talked about setting up in Hefei. Hefei was in Anhui province, which once upon a time was the poorest province in China. That's in fact where the farmers actually took it upon themselves to introduce a reform even before reform and opening up, which set the basis for a lot of the agricultural reforms, setting up their own private plots. Today, that is also the home of the Institute of Plasma Physics, where the East Tokamak reactor is. This is now the center, a flourishing center of science and technology, and that's really the right place to be. But I think it's an understandable that the Germans in particular, which have been export-oriented, were very eager to get involved in this. And believe me, I say this, the Belt and Road Initiative I was involved in it at a very early stage in 1992 under what was called the Eurasian Land Bridge. That was the first belt of the Belt and Road, which China was working on already in the 1990s. And it wasn't until they became a little more wealthy that it became a policy which was extended to the rest of the world. And it has really changed the tide. And people like the head of Volkswagen realizes where the action is, knows where that's going to go, that's going to be beneficial to them, to the European nations, which are now connected in, I think, 8 different lines with China in terms of the international trade. And the other aspect of that is it's not, in terms of the Belt and Road and the Global South, these are not just individual countries now. They are organized in very important groups, like the BRICS in particular, and the SCO, and they are moving forward. They're moving forward, among other things, to create alternative financial arrangements outside of the dollar system, which is going to be very, very important as we're moving forward.
Anthony, I'm going to give you the last bite at the apple. Dennis Simon is a distinguished fellow at the Institute for China-American Studies, and he's talking about China's economy and how it's going to be transforming in the coming years. I thought we might listen to that and maybe get some closing thoughts from you, so let's watch.
I think what we're going to see in terms of the way China looks in the future is we're going to see the onset of the digital economy. I think things are going to become more efficient. We're going to see a smarter China afoot, and that applies to the everyday consumer as well as to the way government makes decisions. We're going to see more e-government, in other words, and we're also going to see a society in which the center of gravity transitions from labor, basically inexpensive labor, to basically brain power. And China is going to be driven by a very significant talent pool that's going to be an important part of this new innovation economy.
Talk to us about your thoughts on that.
Yes, Mike, that's absolutely spot on, because in the 1930s, Simon Kuznets basically invented the GDP numbers to basically count how much production takes place and how fast is the economy growing. And the implication was that if you're growing at 5%, it's not as good as if you're growing at 6% or 7%. But think about the GDP numbers. There you include people that maybe are going to the doctor because maybe there's too much pollution and they're getting sick. That's boosting GDP. But now in China, they're saying it's not just GDP, it's the smart GDP, the quality GDP. In other words, if we somehow create something that's new, innovative, and makes our lives better, then we should give much greater weight to that. If you're creating a product that creates more pollution and makes people sick and makes us worse off, then maybe we shouldn't be that excited. So we're not going to count basic units of production like we did in the 30s, 40s, 50s, and even now in the United States, but we're going to be a lot smarter about it. Whether it's smart power, whether it's smart production, this is the wave of the future.
And that is going to close our discussion on global opportunities and deepening China's reform in the new era. On behalf of China Media Group and the Bank of China USA, I'd like to thank all of our esteemed guests for sharing their insights and valuable analysis today. Everyone here has a front row seat to watch China's efforts to deepen reforms and to advance Chinese modernization over the next few years. I know I'll be watching. I'm sure all of you are excited to watch. Thanks so much for joining us. I'm Mike Walter.